All right, we're back with episode 6
Yep.
from the warehouse.
Yep.
And Tim is coming back from
B&G Cigar Lounge in West Carrollton, Ohio. Awesome guys over there.
Yeah.
Great, great proprietors. Gonzo and Brian.
hence the B&G.
Yep. Gonzo and Brian.
All right.
They have awesome guys. Awesome. They're really into customer service. So like everybody that comes in, they like walk with them in the lounge. They're very gregarious, friendly. Gonzo has this awesome mustache, and Brian has this like amazing beard.
Real hands-on retail.
Very hands-on.
Yeah, that's important.
It was great. Saw some consumers that were like old friends from like literally 15 years ago, probably 20 years ago.
Wow.
So it was
And they're still
it was
with
cool. It was good.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was
Did
great.
you do it with Jake?
I did it with Jake.
Did he wear the hat?
He wore the hat. He
wore
has
the
a
hat.
hat that has like a cigar in it, and
I think that's.
I'm getting a
become
lot
his
more
signature
comments
piece.
of like, have you seen Jake? And they're like, oh, you mean Jake from State Farm? I mean, like that's kind of a new running joke. I mean,
When he
used
first came
that a
on
lot.
board, we'd always ask him if he's wearing khakis on the Zoom. That was like the joke that lasted for a little while. But now he's
Yeah.
got like the fedora hat or whatever, and he's got a look going on.
Yeah, now I have a new kind of discovery, which is like if I'm in, like I was in Dayton, right? Because they were close to Dayton,
Mm-hmm.
but Columbus was like an hour away. I need to fly out of the city that you're the larger city,
Sure.
with a direct flight.
Right.
Because I had like a flight that was going Dayton, Chicago, Nashville. First flight out in the morning, 7 a.m. Technical difficulties.
Of course.
Yeah, so then I ended up hopping in an Uber and going to like, Columbus to get the direct flight.
I swear nobody gets
Road
flights
Warriors.
that are on time. Miguel went through the same thing, I think, this week with a delay in Tampa or Atlanta or something.
Oh, we did?
It's like
Yeah.
nobody. It's like Greyhound in the sky lately.
No, you just want to go like direct as possible,
I would think.
and
You probably could have driven home quicker than it took you to fly home from Ohio, to be honest.
maybe I didn't
I've
really
driven
kind
to
of.
Columbus a few times.
I didn't do
It's
that.
not that bad.
What have you been up to? You've been working on some new.
Yeah, so
kind of
what
stuff.
we're like, I don't know whenever this thing airs, but as of today, we're probably like 55 days from the PCA show. So I've just been, my head's been down the rabbit hole of product development and getting all the little bells and whistles
Yeah.
correct. A lot of moving pieces. I mean, it's the blend is one thing. Once you finally get that, you still got the bands, the box, the insert, the ribbon, every little detail. So this one's taking some time, but hopefully it'll be worth it in the end. And delays. That's the other thing, is like lead time on supplies. One day it's 8 weeks for bands. The next day it's like 12 weeks. You're like, oh no, now we're not gonna have them in time. So we had to switch bands from the Dominican to being produced in Nicaragua because their lead time was shorter than the DR. So they should be coming with the Bosphorus materials now. Fingers crossed.
I mean, it's like interesting. You have one little kind of wrinkle that happens
100%.
in the cog, and it kind of delays everything.
Everything.
Just because, like, in Holland at Vrijdag, they have one guy who makes all the embossing plates or something like. Yeah, I think that's it. And the person that was helping him making the embossing plates, during COVID, that got a delay, and so that's caused like this kind of big backup there. That means more people have to order from other sources,
their lead
and
time
it
is
comes up.
26 weeks.
Yeah,
Last
hopefully
I
they'll
heard.
get better.
It's been, I think, if you want to make $1 million in this business, you start a print company or something. I mean, geez, the way it's going.
Yeah, but
it's
I mean, the
crazy.
cost of starting that
Oh.
is going to be like
It's crazy.
crazy to do that too.
But there are very few sources to do that, and that becomes more problematic this time of year because everybody's looking for the same thing, So, but
I get more and more comments, by the way, when I'm on the road of people, the pie synesthesia yellow, they want us to make it a normal production cigar because
That's
they like
interesting
that blend so much,
to me, it was like one of the few, like, I don't want to say mild cigars because that gives a bad connotation, but it was one of the most approachable, mild to medium bodied cigars that has come out recently. I enjoyed that cigar a lot, the few that I got to smoke.
I want to say that I feel like a bit of a, I don't know if it's a misconception or misunderstanding of like, when you take tobacco and you ferment the hell out of it, right? Which I'm always a big fan of because, it has to do with the soil and what are the components of the soil, and then how do those components go through the stalk and then into the leaf, like very similar to wine, that then you take the leaf, you break it from the stalk, you bring it to the barn, you hang it, you let the chlorophyll drain, it becomes brown, you separate them by size, they get fermented more, they get placed in a bale, somebody buys them, they bring it in, and then they determine, do I want to ferment it more or not? Most of the time they ferment it a bit more, do you know?
Yep.
But there's some, I think, that don't. So
Intentionally, I think.
Intentionally,
yes, correct.
So that it has more nicotine content.
Right.
Because when they're being fermented, building them up waist high and then wetting them and then covering them with burlap and putting the thermometer in the middle, then it causes it to, thin out and more tar and nicotine evaporate. So, then it ends up like you have a cigar, like, for example, like, I can't see your carbon ring is thin. My carbon ring is thin. I mean, when you have a carbon ring that looks more like a speed bump, then it usually is a telltale sign that it could have been fermented more.
Yeah, that wrapper needed more time.
So, like, for example, I smoked a cigar before I left town last week that somebody gave me here. They're like, oh, people like this cigar. It was like a bundle cigar.
Mm.
And I smoked it and it had a pretty thick, carbon ring. And, of course, then there's also some people that they don't know how to retrohale.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that when you retrohale, that you can, meaning blowing it out of your nose, you can pick up more spice. If it feels hot in your nose or pins are pricking your nose, then you can get a good kind of, it helps calibrate the relative kind of strength of the tobaccos that you're smoking. But I mean, I'm a big fan of like fermenting the hell out of it so that you get the ultimate flavor. I'm not a big fan of nicotine content.
Yeah.
Under fermenting.
To the retrohale point, Ernesto Perez Carrillo, he taught me something in reverse of that, actually. When way back in the day when we were validating tobaccos, I always thought that, you smoke them, and that is part of it. You smoke the leaf, what have you. But he did a thing where he took like a hand of tobaccos and he lit it, and he's waving it like a shaman, and he's like this, right? Mm-hmm. And he's like, here, take a hit. I'm like, what? He's like, take a hit. And I was like, no, really. And I was like, whoa. He's like, that's how you know the strength of the tobacco, because essentially what you're doing is retrohaling in reverse. You're just breathing it in like that, and then you really get it in your sinus cavity, and you really understand the power of that specifically.
But is that like, that's before he's fermenting it or anything?
That's when he took it out of a pilon and basically said, okay, this is what we're working with right now. This is where it's at. And I'm like, whoa. But I remember him go, take a hit. And it's just like he's waving it underneath you like this shaman. And he's like, whoa. It was actually, I remember it was a tobacco that I thought would have had no real strength or fortitude to it. It was like a jalapa, like a seco. But I was just like, wow. Now I understand. Little tricks like that you learn along the way. It's an interesting process.
I did a cocktail and cigar pairing class, with this friend of mine named Chris Chamberlain, who's like, a published author on like, food of the South and stuff like this. So it was kind of like a fundraising class for my kids' school, and which, he and I both went to the same school, and my kids are there. And so it was like, they have all these cool classes that are like, and some of them are like, how do you, roasting a pig, or starting a garden or whatever. And this one was a cocktail and cigar class. And there were 20 legit cigar smokers, serious cigar smokers that took the class. Mm-hmm. And so I had Mil Diaz, Le Patissier, Bosphorus, and I had one bundle of Aramas that I brought out. And so then he paired them with these cocktails. And again, these guys are buying, men and women were there that are buying cigars in Nashville, and none of them knew how to retrohale.
Interesting.
So I taught them how to retrohale, which is either one or two ways. For me, I learned like you bringing it to the back of your palate, and I always think of a lever that goes down and up and it pushes it. So for me, that works, right. That imagery. For them, some of them were like, bring it to the back of your palate, push the back of your tongue up, and then it goes through your nose, and that worked for a lot of them too. But then when they did it, they're like, oh, wow, I can taste,
it's a whole different thing.
It opens a whole different thing. So
100%.
What I find on like Instagram, I don't know if you find this at all, it's like, oh, I smoked the Bosphorus, really nice, mild cigar. I'm like, dude, it's not a mild cigar. I hate to break it to you. Yeah. But of course, you can't say that because you don't want to look like a jerk saying, you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
I mean, it's subjective, right? So it could be mild to that person. But to me, it's like, are they smoking it? I don't want to say correctly, but kind of.
Yeah, no, I think there's a component of that too. Like all the old school guys like Ernie and Placencia, the list goes on. They all retrohale because that's really where you get the essence of the flavor. It's like to me, it's like tasting something just like that and then spitting it out. Whereas you really get the full impact when you take it through the sinus cavity and then oh wait a second, then what lingers on your palate after that? There's a whole different dimension of the cigar. We went through the same thing with Headley Grange. When we released Headley Grange, it was like, oh, it's a nice mild cigar. I'm like, no,
Yeah, it's not
you
mild.
retrohale it. You're like, oh, now you get the pepper. Now you get the spice component of that blend.
I think that what it is there is a confusion, I believe, between. So we know these tobaccos are all really, really well, I would say, fermented to as much as they can be fermented. So as a result of that, you have less tar and nicotine, and then it becomes like it's smoother. You don't have the rawness of the fact that it has not been
Correct.
on purpose fermented as much, so that it has more of that nicotine content gives it more of that kind of raw,
Yeah.
and so maybe people are getting confused by when they say it's mild and they're not retrohaling. It's because it's smoother due to the fact that it's been fermented longer.
Right.
Maybe
Yeah,
that's it.
absolutely. Yeah, it could be. It could be. I think the domestic palate, to me, like there's a segment of the United States that they want something that'll make you nauseous and give you the sweats. And
Yeah,
everything.
no.
That's never been like enjoyable to me.
That's not the
It's not the
purpose
point
of cigars.
I agree.
Right? I mean, if you want to get nicotine content, then smoke a cigarette.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So
it's like, do you want to do a shot or you want to sip on a nice?
that's right. That's 100% right.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to why you want to drink a bourbon for the flavor,
Right.
or do you want to get drunk? If you want to get drunk,
in a
then you do
nutshell.
a shot.
Exactly. No, that's one of the things I love about working like with factories like Ernesto, where they, everybody gets a lot of their tobaccos from brokers and they process it to a point. Some factories will stop at that point and they'll just blend the cigar. Whereas you have a house like Ernesto's where they'll go ahead and they'll further process that tobacco so that you have those nice thin carbon rings and you have the rounded, cigar where it's not edgy and aggressive and nicotine laden, and it's a difference between a premium cigar, I think, and a stogie. That's the way I kind of dumb it down a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about Aramas though, because by the time this comes out, your second launch,
Yeah.
right, the follow up to Bosphorus will
Right.
be hitting the shelves because the good news on that is that those cigars were produced months ago. They've been aging, they're getting better
Yeah,
and better by
that's
the
right.
day, right? So again, the material delay in that instance was boxes. And those are being finished up, and so we'll be shipping those out by the time this airs. But talk a little bit about the inspiration of Aramas versus Bosphorus, and what you were trying to go for with that blend.
Well, I mean, Bosphorus was all about kind of, my mother's side, even though my father was, born and raised in Istanbul. And Istanbul is a very kinetic, multicultural, a lot going on city, a lot of sights and sounds and smells and flavors, but also it represents, the strait that goes through Istanbul, which Istanbul, half of it is in Europe, half of it is in Asia Minor. So it's considered to be like kind of, the gateway from Europe into Asia. And, and at its best, when there was an election that's still in process, there has to be a runoff now in Turkey that, back in the old days, my father would write about Istanbul being like a very kind of multicultural capital where you had like people of all different kind of religions and backgrounds, kind of a melting pot intermingling, So he wanted the cigar to be kind of like rich and complex. As I talk about it over and over, I realized that what's the unique proposition that each cigar has, and in this case, it has a double binder, one of them, which we never did at CAO,
Right.
one of them being Connecticut, Ecuador, and the other one being Jalapa, and how that lends to more of a layered flavor, how it burns slower. And people asked at B&G, they were like, well, how did you know, why a double binder? How did you know? And I was like, we just tried a bunch of samples that didn't have it versus those that did, and we kept going back to the one that had a double binder. So for me, I think it's important because there's a lot of different choices out there as to like, what cigars are you going to buy? So it really has to do with like the devil's in the details and what's the unique thing in the cigar that's going to make this cigar A different than cigar B. You know,
Right.
so for Aramas, you know, it's called Aramas because it's the world calls Mount Ararat Mount Ararat. People in Armenia refer to it as Masis, so it's taking the prefix of both Ararat and Masis and calling it Aramas. So that symbolizes like my father's background, the Armenian background. There's like a monastery in front of it called Korvarap, which is like a very holy site, important site for Armenians, and we wanted to make that cigar kind of rich too and complex to represent Jano's side. So I feel like the wrapper being Mexican San Andreas, the binder Ecuador Sumatra, and the fillers being Nicaragua and also Dominican like Piloto Cubano, which I really like, have fallen in love with that tobacco.
Same.
You know, when you smoke it on its own, it's like really kind of, it's got a lot of spice. It's got a lot of kind of, eye-popping kind of elements to it that it wakes you up. And then we put a little bit in that one, Connecticut broadleaf. And I think the Connecticut broadleaf in there, combined with the Piloto Cubano and like, the Nicaraguan jalapa we have in there, like really gives it that kind of unique flavor. It's almost
I
like,
think it's like a little sweet and a little bit of spice. Too,
yeah,
right?
it's like eating a 70% cacao chocolate that has maybe some seasoning like
a chili
almost,
or something.
yeah, almost like chili
yeah.
or chili powder or like some chipotle pepper type of coating.
Right.
So it's a really kind of and I also like to go and smoke a lot of other people's cigars so I can like know that what to compare. You know what I mean? Like I see what's out there and what.
Have you smoked
people
anything
like it.
recently out there in the field that caught your attention? And go, oh, this is pretty good.
Yeah, well, I'm really kind of obviously we have a long relationship with Nestor Plasencia and his family, and we think the world of them, and I'm really kind of happy to see that finally he has a cigar that is, I think, worthy of his awesome name on it that are smoking really well. The Alma Fuerte, I smoked
Excellent
a
cigar.
diadema of that, and I thought it was a wonderful cigar.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a cigar to me that like kind of, I was like, okay, good. These are like good people, my friends, that are coming up with a cigar that I like. But I mean,
it's interesting because that's not Placencia's first foray into making their own cigar.
No.
They did I think it was called Organica.
Yeah.
Years ago. I think we were still at CAO when they came out with Organica, and now, a dozen years later, they've really hit their stride with the Alma Fuerte and those cigars. It's nice to see that he's getting his attention.
Yeah, it is. And then
he's made so many great cigars for so many people.
Yeah. But I mean, there are a lot of people that, like Rocky Patel is one of my I think best friends in the business. So, you always want to be supportive of people that are your buddies.
Yeah.
So I always like to kind of try and support other friends that are in the business and like to see them do well.
One of the things I found interesting about Bosphorus versus Aramas is just visually the cigars look so different. Because what was the wrapper on Bosphorus again?
I mean, the wrapper is Havana 2000 Ecuador on Bosphorus.
And it's just got that traditional nice Colorado Claro kind of tone to it. And then you got Aramas, which is dark, San Andreas Mexican. They just look different. And I think the sizes you went with in Aramas were a little bit different than Bosphorus as well.
Yeah, so I mean, the only two sizes that are common are there's a 5x52 and a 5.5x55, which that's my personal favorite size. It's 5.5 by 55.
Yeah.
And some people are like, "Oh, why didn't you do a traditional Toro?" But if you think about it, I mean, 5.5 by 55 is basically a Toro. I mean, it's a thicker Toro. I mean, things evolve. Things kind of as we get older or as time changes. I mean, passes. We change a little bit. So, I mean, for me, I like a Toro that has more of a mouthful. So that's more of a really kind of a mouthful Toro. Or,
I mean, back when like we started, it was like 6x50 was a Toro.
Yeah.
And now to your point, I think like a 54, 55 is now kind of perceived as a Toro, right?
Yeah.
So it's.
I mean, I call it as like kind of a, some people might say it's like a Robusto Extra or something. Yeah. I mean, I don't care what you call it. It tastes damn good.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, that's how I look at it. You like a Toro, you like it. You want a Robusto Extra, there you go, whatever.
But you also did a Figurado in the Aramas, right?
Did you? Yeah. So that the two new one is 6x60, and then a 6 1/4 by 54 torpedo, but just because, those are two particular sizes that Ernesto makes like really well. So why not kind of play to somebody's strength and go in that direction?
He does, definitely.
Now wait, let me ask this. So, I'm a big fan of Mil Diaz. I think Mil Diaz is a wonderful cigar. What's the difference between the regular Mil Diaz and the Maranitos?
Wrapper.
What's
the wrapper's Sumatra on Maranitos. And that's so we did a Maranitos last year.
Ecuador Sumatra wrapper on Maranitos.
Yeah. But the binder filler component is the same as the traditional. We just did a one-off on it last year, and I think that was like a 5 7/8 52. And then this year we did a radio. I went to a radio. So what's your favorite vitola? And he said a 6 1/8 48, I believe.
Wow.
And yeah, it's a smaller, more elegant cigar. So we did the E648 Maranitos, and that we just released that a month or two ago, something like that. But that's really the only difference. I mean, we haven't really extended the Mil Diaz brand past the first 4 vitolas that we came out with in 2020. But not to get too far ahead, but we are working on an extension possibly for PCA. The working title is a Topes, which is it's a Trinidad vitola, 4 7/8 by 56. So we might get that ready for the show. That might be a little something to add on. But
are you talking about like the new releases for the trade show yet, or you're still kind of?
I'm still kind of keeping that one kind of close to the vest until I'm absolutely positively 120% sure it's going to be there. We're still talking about it, but it's been something we started working on with Ernesto in March of last year, so over a year ago. And he's gotten to a point where like he's really not satisfied with the blend. He's like, no, let's try this. And I thought we had it finalized in November of last year. And then he hit me up and just said, nope, we're going to start all over again. So, and then actually the branding, the packaging has gone through 3 different renditions. And we finally hit upon one that I think everybody's pretty proud of. So I'm looking forward to getting that out. And as the weeks come, I've been doing little Instagram pops here and there, just talking a little bit about the backstory of the brand, about the sizes. The sizes are going to be interesting because kind of like what we were just talking about, how 6 by 50 is now 555 or whatever. Ernie was like, I know you like these small ring gauges, that's cute, the 44s, the 46s, 48s, but this blend's going to work better north of 50. And I was a little hesitant at first, but the more I smoked through all the pre-releases and the sizes, and I was like, my favorite is actually the 56 and the 54. So a little bit bigger for us as ground heads, but I think it works. It works really well with this blend. And we test marketed it to a few people, sent some samples out here and there, and the feedback's been really good. So
now, controversial topic. You don't like 6 by 60s.
No.
Why?
I don't have anything against them per se. It's just not something that I personally would go to smoke, because I just always felt awkward smoking a cigar that big. It felt like a stogie to me, and it was never something that it's like Lanceros on the other side of the spectrum. It's like a lot of people like Lanceros,
right,
but I'd never really, it's not something I would reach for. And same thing with a 660. My sweet spot as a smoker has always been like everything from a Corona up to like a traditional 5 5/8 46, maybe a 48. That's always kind of like what I'm smoking right now is a 5 1/4 50, or a 44. So that's what I would personally go to. So it's hard for me to get behind a vitola that I don't smoke, like a 660. That said, I know they sell well. I know that they perform well. I know there's a segment of the marketplace that clamors for it. And we also did try it back in the day. I think we talked about this on one of the other pods, but Miguel had wanted me to do a 6 by 60 for years. And so we tried it, and I said, what blend do you want to do it with? And he picked Luminosa, which to your point probably wasn't the best one to test market it on because it's a mild, creamy cigar. But it was a complete failure for us. Now, that said, I don't foresee that problem happening with Aramas. I think it'll probably crush with Aramas.
Well, I don't mind 6 by 60s. I mean, I like them. I think that they
have a history.
They deliver a good mouthfeel.
You have a history of Brasilia with the Amazon.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to that was a 660 in a heavier, stout blend, and that performed extremely well back in the day, right?
Yeah. People liked it, for sure.
And that was really on the cusp of bigger ring gauges. It really wasn't like everybody was doing 660s back then. There's a handful, but again, going back to Ernie, I think that he was part and parcel of really starting that movement with the Cigar, the Gloria Cubana.
Yeah,
right.
that's
All
right.
those big, and that's what he smokes mostly is 660s and it's big, heavy
Yeah,
cigars.
you got you just got a good mouthfeel.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, like when we had CAO Gold, I thought CAO Gold Double Corona was my favorite smoking size in that. And that was like what was the length on that? I know it was a 54 ring gauge. Was it 6.5 or was it greater? 7?
God, I can't remember. I have to
Maybe?
be honest. I have to go back.
Maybe 7
It
by
was
54?
a big cigar.
I mean, it was a great cigar while you're outside
Yeah.
because it was like buttery and creamy. And you got more of the butter and cream with the 54 than you did, let's say, on the Corona.
Yeah.
The Corona was a bit more sharper than it was on the
100%.
it was smoother on the 54. So it kind of depends. I mean, even like when I'm out doing events, selling Bosphorus right now, like there's a big difference in the sizes on how they taste.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it actually surprises me because it's the exact same blend.
Yeah.
But like the 4x50, I like to tell people, sometimes I think, interesting, people find it like confusing. Like if I say, to me, like a 6x50, 4x50 is like drinking a double espresso.
Yeah.
I want coffee that has concentrated, not as much water.
Right.
But I want to like taste the coffee, meaning the kind of the earth, really, when it comes down to like what are the nutrients of the soil and how is that being concentrated in the bean. Similarly with cigars.
I love that 4x50, by the way.
Yeah, no, it's
I really, really, I think that might be my personal favorite in the brand. But it starts right away and you just get it. It's, like you said, it's very concentrated. It's all right there. And it's like,
yeah, that's really good. I mean, I like the 5.5x55 is my favorite in it because I love, the box press too. But if you smoke like a Churchill size or the 6.25x54, that actually you pick up more of the sweeter notes of that blend. Whereas in the 4x50, you're picking up more of the spice of that blend. So it's I'm sure you find the same way in the different vitolas, of a lot of the Crowned Heads brands too.
Agreed, 100%. I think a lot of it has to do with the ratio between wrapper to binder to filler. Because there's always that long-going debate in the industry. What is 70% of the flavor? Is it the wrapper because it's hitting your tongue, or is it the binder-filler combination? Everybody has a different take on that. But I do think that the different vitolas within a brand all kind of smoke a little bit differently, even though on paper the blend is the same.
But I also like to tell the consumers that whatever it is that we go for, and I think that you have the same philosophical approach, we're not going for something that's going to like make you nauseous or knock you on your ass. No. We're going for flavor. You know what I mean? Like,
it should be enjoyable. Cigar smoking should be something you sit back like we're doing, relax, enjoy, savor it. It's not like some food challenge where like, can I eat 20 peppers in 10 minutes? I'm get all sweaty and like, oh.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of guys, I don't know. I just never got that. That was something Brightman said. We were talking about Brightman before we started taping, but going back to George Brightman. Yes.
George Brightman and he always spoke a cigar like this. He'd go,
yep.
Dude.
Yeah. Yeah. But he always said, cigar smoking should be something that is not a challenge. It's an enjoyment.
Yeah.
And that always stuck with me. And I think that's how we try to go about the process, whatever blend we're working on, for sure.
But I always say to people, like, we go for flavor, right? Whether you're smoking a milder, cigar versus medium plus versus fuller, that it should be have a lot of flavor.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you smoke a cigar that you think is going to be milder, it doesn't mean that it should be bereft of flavor.
No, you get different notes in that lane. You get cream, you get some sweet, you get a little bit of just, maybe a little bit of nutmeg or cinnamon, whatever. But there's an interesting component. And instead of it's not heavy like a broadleaf or San Andreas, which is a different segment of flavors. That's why I think you need to come out with a sampler for Bosphorus and Aramas, because they are so distinctly different. And it'd be an interesting in one package for the consumer to go home and go, okay, I'm gonna smoke this next to this, and you really get the nuances and the differences of what make each of those brands and blends great.
Yeah, and I think people are curious about like what what makes a cigar, what's in a cigar, what's kind of what's in the kitchen. And honestly, we went at the beginning of the year down to Ernesto's factory down in Dominican Republic. We had asked for him we wanted to try 100% of all the tobaccos that he's using most often. And then that becomes like, what's in the spice cabinet. You know what cinnamon tastes like, or cumin tastes like, or black pepper, white pepper on its own. Exactly the same. So, I said to Ernesto, I'm like, this is a lot like cooking, isn't it? And he's like, that's exactly right. It's like cooking. You once you identify what those spices are that you have in the cabinet, then it becomes a matter of like combining them to different kind of percentages or degrees. And then, after you've fermented the hell out of them, and then you combine them into a blend, and then you let the blend marry and rest for a certain degree, amount of days,
Right.
which allows those tobaccos to marry and kind of, it's almost like slow cooking something.
Mm-hmm.
Once you slow cook something, then you allow those spices that you've chosen to put on a meat, even if you're smoking something, you know what I mean? Like you're the best ones are the ones that you're kind of slow cooking or slower cooking.
And then even then, they don't always play well with each other in the final outcome. And then you still got to go back and okay, wait a second, let's swap this out for this, and let's try this. So it's definitely a process.
And you also have to let the humidity evaporate from the cigar, right? So that you're smoking a cigar like what it's going to be like ideally on the shelf.
Yeah, and then there's always that adage of like, cigars taste different when you're in the factory as opposed to when you come home and you let them rest. And then I never personally bought into that too much, but I think that I just think it's a question of letting them dissipate the moisture and the just letting them acclimate once you get them home. But as far as like, they taste completely differently down there as opposed to here, there's a little bit of that. But I mean, typically what I do is like when I get samples, like I'll take them out of the cello and I'll lay them out and I'll literally smoke them like, a couple now and then maybe one in a couple of days and then a couple of weeks and see how, and it does progress. It does, the flavors tend to round out a little bit. So
then at what point in time does it become a conversation where you say, okay, I think we've had enough tinkering of the blend, and
that's a good question to have with Ernesto. Because it's like even when you think you're there, it can be better. It can be better, and then finally you just got to go, okay, it's enough. To me, it's like that. I call it the aha moment for me, where you know it when you're there. When you smoke it, you're like, okay, this is it. That's the aha moment. And I don't know how better to define it or describe it other than trial and error. And then you get to that point, you're like, for me, that's it.
I think it also has to do with the fact that, like, at this point in time, you and I have been smoking cigars for X number of years of our lives, and we have, palates that are acclimated to the product, and
it's that 10,000 hours, right?
Yeah, the 10,000 hours, and then either like you know it or you don't know it. You taste something and you're like, that works, or you taste something and you're like, that's not interesting. And I mean, in the end, it needs to be compelling. It's either compelling or it's not compelling. And you just want it to be compelling so that you can like say, I'll smoke another one of these.
Correct.
As
simple as that sounds, but the process of getting there is very involved.
Yeah, like we're working on this Pie Synesthesia Red.
Yes.
And so, we were down at the factory at the beginning of the year. Ernesto had this, some tobacco. I think it was like maybe 12-year-old or 13-year-old Esteli Lajero, right? I think that's what it was. And he burned it, and it smelled like dry-aged beef. And me and Brian McGee, our Texas manager,
right,
both got excited because Brian and I both like slow cooking meats.
Yeah.
Him especially. So he got very excited. I got excited. And then, so he sent some samples, I believe, that had that in it for Pie Synesthesia Red. The problem is that it just didn't taste. I asked consumers, like, what does red mean to you? What should that taste like? Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, they say heat. Hot. Heat, spice.
Yes.
Hot sauce. I mean, interesting, right? Because if you asked maybe 20 years ago, hot sauce may not have been as predominant. Like, right, 20 years ago, you might have think the only hot sauce is Tabasco, which is more like vinegary of a hot sauce, a very good hot sauce.
Right.
right? I mean, the classic hot sauce, but now there's like so many different varieties of hot sauce. They might have said even ketchup, who knows, 20
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
But now people think of, so you try to deliver what people think of when they think of red. So the first few samples he sent of it were just not,
Red enough.
they were too nuanced.
Yeah.
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 And so then finally we smoked some that were like, it started off bang, right? And then it kind of, you can ease into it. And then there was another bang to the degree in that case where it's like, oh, wow, this is actually got more powerful, even though they're well fermented.
Mm-hmm.
You need to eat something before you smoke this one, So it's an interesting kind of, and we're working, I mean, that'll be released at the trade show.
For people that are just kind of like, maybe this was their first pod or whatever, go back a little bit to the whole pie concept.
Yeah.
And what yellow meant and that kind of a thing, so they can kind of get a framework for why you're going from yellow to red.
Right. And that'll be interesting when you come to like green, right?
Yeah.
When we get to that color, that'll be, because you think of Candela. I like Candela. But not all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be more challenging. Is like, because when you think of green,
it's not the best thing to think of.
Yeah,
when it
right.
comes
You
to
think
cigar,
of unripe stuff.
Yeah.
So that'll be a more challenging, or blue.
Mm-hmm.
Because you want to make something that's menthol-y.
Right.
Is that?
Yeah.
Some stuff doesn't work.
So yellow was
You gotta,
creamy, light, buttery.
Yeah. As opposed to acidic or citrusy.
What's after red? Because how's the
burnt orange?
That won't be too bad.
No, that won't be. That won't be too bad. It's just like, you'll have to think of like what to. Yeah. How to kind of convey that.
I love that concept though. I think that's really it's unique.
Well, it's like a lot of it is you got to ask people what they're looking for when they think of like that,
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
It could be just a jumping off point too. It doesn't have to be literal. Like when you said green, I don't know if you necessarily need to use Candela. It could be something else, but that's a jumping off point for that particular release.
I think it's possible to do some Candela that is, you just want to do something that like, you want it to look kind of the color.
Yeah.
I
think will be interesting. Like, how many colors are in pie? 5?
No, 9.
9?
Yeah.
Oh, shoot.
9 colors.
You got a long ways to go. I was going to say, eventually you get to a point where you do a sampler of, each of them. Somebody brought that to my attention, like, because we're about to release Las Calaveras 2023. And as you know, that changes every year since 2014. So like, hey, why don't you do a sampler of one of each of it? And I'm like, impossible, unless you had stored some away, and so thinking ahead, that might not be a bad idea for
Do you start with that process of thinking, who am I going to honor, or how do you start with that process of determining what's the next Las Calaveras?
The blend comes first, and it's just trying not to be redundant and changing up the blend slightly, and there's only so many variations on the theme. And then once we get that down and we think that the blend is substantial, then we go back, and then you have the arduous process of like, okay, who passed away in the year before, and here's all the initials of the possibilities, and then 3 or 4 of us will kind of vote and pick. And if there's a family member of somebody, like the only year that we had one person devoted to the brand was 2019 because it was for Jono. Every other year there's been 4 different sets of initials on there.
Oh, 4 different sets of initials.
Because there's 2 coins on each side.
Yeah.
So traditionally it's, one individual, 1, 2, 3, 4. But with Jono, we did Jono's initials, and then we had basically just abbreviations of sayings. Like I think it was talk is cheap and make it happen. Because those are the 2 things that I remember most dearly about Jono. So that was 2019, which is I thought that blend was fantastic. It was one of my favorites. So it was.
Is it necessarily somebody well known or not, or a combination?
It could be somebody that's related to the industry. It could be somebody that's related to somebody at Crowned Heads. It could be. Like we've had. I think Wes had an aunt on there, and maybe Miguel had a family member on there. I think my grandmother was on one of the first ones, maybe 16, 17.
Do you list those in the press release?
No, I don't talk about it. If people ask me, like if a blogger says, "Oh, who were the initials?" then I'll tell them, but I don't make that a focal point.
Uh-huh.
I think it just kind of that particular release just kind of lives on its own.
Does the skull kind of change in color?
The label coloration, and the
Label
band
changes.
yeah, and that's why people kind of now they go, oh, I like the green one. I'm like, oh, okay, that was 2017, 18, something like that.
How do you pick the color?
Just whatever's, whatever I'm feeling at the end of the year, because we have to get that in production like usually Jan Feb to
Yeah.
get the bands ready. So the color has obviously long been decided upon for 2023. Bands are done, labels are done, cigars have been done, and so now it's just a matter of getting everything dressed, and we'll be announcing that probably by the time this thing comes out.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so it'll be fun. But it's funny because people actually have like betting pools on what the color is going to be. So, but I never tell anybody I don't even tell Condor what the color is going to be.
Oh yeah,
So I just keep it close to the vest. But that'll be coming out soon.
that's
too.
cool. That's
Yeah,
cool.
That's fun.
Well, I think it's always helpful when people post what questions they have for us to answer,
I agree.
so that we can like explore those.
Well, I think that's what we try to do on this episode. Somebody had made a mention of they wanted to see more about behind the scenes and how the sausage is made, and I think you kind of touched upon that a lot with what we discussed today. But what else we got? What are we running on now?
I think that's good. I think we've got a good time.
We're at 43? All right.
That's
Thank
a
you,
good amount
Cole.
of time.
That's a good time. So again, comment, like, subscribe, leave your questions, follow us on Instagram, and I guess that's about it until we see you on the next
Yep.
one. All right. Take care.
Take care.